Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Altar Podcast, a conversation with the luminous and deeply wise Hillary McBride. I'll introduce you to Hillary in just a moment. One of the many reasons I wanted to spotlight her is that her work covers the same territory as my new course, Energize, 28 days to supercharge your metabolism and nourish your radiance. I created Energize because I wanted to offer a nutrition program that honors and accepts yourself just as you are, while creating new practices of deeper nourishment for your body, as well as your mindset and spirit, and healing your body image. A perspective that sees food as an abundant gift to us and understands our relationship to it as energy, both practically and spiritually. You can learn all about Energize at nicolemeline.com/energize. In this conversation with Hillary, we go into how we can be growth-oriented while still living in gratitude and contentment with who we are now. That's a fine line to dance. And maybe you felt the exhaustion or apathy that can be the mark that you're living in a constant state of dissatisfaction, which can be the subtext to so much of wellness and personal development culture. So we explore how to celebrate and accept what is, even as we practice growth. Hillary is such a special and powerful voice for our moment. She is that rare form of public intellectual, translating high-level academic scholarship in psychology into the language of the public square and social media. She's a great follow on Instagram. She is a therapist, researcher, speaker, and writer, and holds a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of British Columbia and a Master's of Arts in counseling psychology. I think her books, The Wisdom of the Body and Practices for Embodied Living, should be manuals for how to relate to your body. This topic that none of us receive formal education in, amazingly, as we grow up. And instead, we're often absorbing toxic ideas from family or from our peer group about how to relate to our bodies. There's so much wisdom in these books and in her work, as you'll hear. I first heard Hillary on the Liturgist podcast, which I've linked to below, along with some other conversations she's had on the We Can Do Hard Things podcast and For the Love podcast. And as you'll hear, her voice itself is good medicine and her wisdom is vast. So, friends, I give you Hillary McBride. Hillary, welcome to the Altar Podcast. I'm so grateful that you're here. As I was sharing right before we started, I think of you as a public intellectual, someone who's translating the weighty scholarship that's going on in academic language and rigorous scholarship. You really bring rigorous scholarship to your work, but offering it in this heartful way, which in my own adventures in grad school, I kind of found that can often be looked down on, or just kind of denigrated in academic spheres. And I think that is changing, but it's just wonderful to see that you're truly bringing an embodied, I think, even way of learning into the field. So I'm grateful for that. And I want to actually start this conversation with one of the practices that you share, and I'm going to show everybody in the practices for embodied living that you suggest. And this is so simple and it's so powerful, as so many of these practices are, but just putting your hands on your body and saying, this is my body. Here I am. So I want to invite you and me to do that right now. And I want to invite our listeners to do that as well. Just your hands anywhere on your body. I usually land on my heart, on my belly, or on my sternum, and breathing into our palms. This is my body. And how is she, which is something you taught me to say, how is she today? Here I am, my feet on the floor, starting to notice the texture between my hand and my clothing. And here we are. So I want to just breathe with everybody to land in this conversation, to land in how we're feeling today with curiosity, tenderness. I
Mm.
believe toward the end of your book, The Wisdom of the Body, you share this manifesto. It's kind of a manifesto for your work. We heal when we can be with what we feel. We heal when we can be with what we feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I also want to invite all of us to just breathe into where we are, who we are, how we're feeling today, with that beautiful hope that there doesn't have to be any judgment, there doesn't have to be any rejection or disappointment with however it is that we're feeling, but we can actually begin to heal the roots of whatever's going on there once we allow ourselves to feel it, which for so many of us is a journey that we maybe rarely or ever even take. So I feel the hope in that possibility, and thank you for that really simple, really powerful tool. And
Oh,
suddenly I feel so much more here.
I'm so glad. What a wonderful way to begin a conversation, which I think podcasting in itself has its a particular kind of cerebrality to it. We're disembodied. I'm not even really in the room. I'm not in the room with you. Like I'm looking at just what
Right.
your neck up looks like. And all of a sudden I got to remember, oh, I have a body. You have a body. Oh, we're bodies here together. And that feels so, so good. So thank you for starting us in a good way like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm,
And I think that that's so I lead a movement practice called Alter.
mm,
And my hope is, and I was, when the word came to me, my first question was, is it altar with an E or altar with an A? And I landed on altar with an E because I think of altar with an E as the, as sourced in our intention, our effort, the little shifts. I also love that alter has this relationship to alteration, which feels like the personalizing, right? Like coming more deeply and truly into ourselves. But I feel it, and I hope that it always rings with alter as an A, because when we do set up, when we do intend upon those little shifts, those little changes, those evolutions, that is a sacred journey. And that is,
mhm,
I think, where we meet spirit. Like when we feel the courage of, I'm going to go in, I'm going to feel whatever it is that's really there, that's really being felt, and I want to alter it truly into myself, right?
mm,
So the you have this line that where you say there is so much goodness within and between us because of our bodies.
mhm,
It's so exciting to feel this. I feel like there's really an emerging conversation. Well, it's more than that. It's an emerging embodiment of a conversation around embodiment, a conversation that the way we know through the body matters, the way things land in the body matters. We can't heal and grow in our heads and kind of necessarily just through conversation, but it's an embodied activity. And your work, as well as I think so many emerging practitioners and leaders in this field, has really helped me to understand movement as medicine, like movement
mhm,
as a laboratory, movement as this
mhm.
curiosity. So I'd actually love to just start with a question to you of, in the practices for embodied living, you talk about these different approaches to movement, which is out of curiosity, as this like way into our hearts. And so I'm curious, how are you moving these days to come home to yourself?
Yeah. I think these days, I've used to be a runner, and then I took a little break for health reasons over for a number of months, and I've been able to pick up running again, and that feels really pleasurable for me, especially because I run near the ocean, and the ocean is feels like one of my greatest teachers and resources externally, that is. And yeah, and so I've been running, and of course I have like a pretty, I was going to say rigorous, but that's not quite the right word. Like an enjoyable, pleasurable dance practice that I feel really committed to. And dance is like a word I use loosely. It's more like movement practice because I'm not trained as a dancer. I just kind of move in a way that feels good for my body and allow the beat to have its way with me, so to speak.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
so I think those are really important practices for me, but also like, Gabrielle Roth's work has really informed this for me, that looking at different patterns of movement and stillness also being a form of movement, a rhythm of movement, so to speak. It's almost I mean, it fits really well with winter and the season of winter where we look outside and it seems like nothing is happening, but actually
Mm,
trees and plants are storing up energy to bloom again.
mm.
And so I think about stillness actually as being a kind of movement practice for me in this season as well, where I'm learning to make more space for rest intentionally as a way of being in relationship with myself and a disruption of the rhythm that I think it's really easy to get caught into. And so I want to include that, right? To highlight the way that what almost looks like the absence of movement can actually be a movement practice in its own right.
So much there.
Mhm.
I want all of us to land for a second on that image of meditation or stillness as
Mhm.
storing up energy. Wow, like,
Mhm.
it's almost like a dam, like imposing a dam, so then you can decide, "Where do I want this to flow? Like, how do I wanna
Uh-huh.
direct this? How do I wanna show up?" Versus I love what you just said about the kind of, like, default rhythms that we can get sucked into, and
Mhm.
that a rhythm like a beat, allowing the beat to have its way with us, shakes us out of that, right? It calls us into this, just to step outside and to kind of feel these primal, deeper rhythms. I'm guessing you've come across Michaela Boehm before. Have you ever come across her? Oh,
Likely at some point, but nothing
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
recall anything right now.
yeah. She's simpatico. She calls this kind of dance nonlinear movement.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Now
yeah, yeah.
I'm familiar
And
with
that
it, yeah.
this is such a great bridge into what I wanted to ask you about, because there's we can think about these kind of categories and these broad, like masculine, feminine, yin, yang, flow, structure, binaries. And I do think that's helpful. And a question that I really wanted to ask you. I'm also a runner, and my I've raced before, and I've raced Ironman, and I've done like like very high intensity training that had a performance goal in mind, right? So very like linear movement in that sense. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about how, here's the way that I phrased it. How can we prioritize caring for our bodies and wanting to optimize our strength and energy? So, in that sense, any kind of linear training, like toward a performance goal, or just even, I love this question: how strong can I get? How can we prioritize caring for our bodies and wanting to optimize our strength and energy while not becoming discontent or obsessive with our bodies? Like, what is that dance, or what is that line where there's there's like a healthy kind of ambition or curiosity, and there's really something to a practice, right? Like committing to a practice, a
Mhm.
sadhana, like I'm going to let this practice have its way with me. And but at the same time, like that line can be so fine between, and I think in the whole like personal development world, the line between wanting to be our best selves and actually continually being discontent with who we are, right? That line of growth can be really tough to navigate. I think I'd love to hear what you think about any of that.
Mhm. I'm so appreciating the complexity that we're wading into here because I think that when we become acquainted with embodiment work, there is maybe an easy trope to rely on that embodiment means follow your impulse every time, no matter what it costs you or how it affects other people around you,
Mm,
which it can, in a way that suggests embodiment is hyper individualism. And again, I actually think
mhm,
that the literature and the spiritual nature of this suggests otherwise. But what I like about the question that you're asking is that it highlights these areas of complexity where I think we can get caught, where perhaps it feels like the things that we're driving ourselves towards actually impair our connection with ourselves. And on the other end of things, it's actually also not good for us if we don't stretch ourselves at all, right? If we're not
mm,
pushing in some way. And so how do we know, how do we assess for health? And I think you're again, part of why this is so complex is because I think that we have to dismantle an assumption that we have about self and health as existing in a moment of time and really pull back and conceptualize health as existing over time and having temporality that has an arc that spans the lifespan.
Mm.
And what that means is that it stops us from getting into traps of feeling like one moment is the sum of health and really looks at this dance that we play throughout our life where balance doesn't necessarily happen in a moment, but can happen over time. Like, a really good example of this would be my history with an eating disorder, where I went from what would be considered air quotes healthy eating to really severe restriction, which again still kind of looked like healthy eating unless you pulled in other elements of assessment like, whoa, what's going on with my mental health and what's going on with my relational health and the experience of suffering that I'm having internally. And my physical health is now really declining. So you could look at me eat one meal, but if you look at the broad story that's happening here, this is not healthy, all the way to what I would call like recovery binging and the experience of eating food because it felt really good to give myself exactly what I wanted. And that balance of like, whoa, I'm flexing something that's really in contrast to what I knew before, that can also be healthy. Me eating however many donuts I want in a sitting, healthy, right? That was actually me exercising something by contrast to what I had been stuck in with a really profound amount of rigidity. So when it comes back to optimizing the journey and how do we ask this question, how strong can I get? I think it's important to ask ourselves, like, can I be flexible with this? Is there something about my self-worth that's so tied up into this where if I can't do it perfectly in the way that I want, right, all of a sudden that creates distress inside of me? Like that would be a good marker. I love to think about health again, not just in terms of how we whitewash and create rigidity around health culture, but actually looking at a whole person dimensions of health, which includes like relational and social health. So, okay, maybe I'm pushing myself and I'm asking how strong can I get, but I'm neglecting my relationships and I'm really neglecting, right, my mental health and the story in my head is starting to get really critical. So like I'm actually pushing myself and performing in a way that I never performed, but what's the cost to me? And is it throwing stuff way out of balance? And then we could pull back even further and say, well, okay, so it throws things out of balance for a while, but so does everything. I mean, I became a mom 2.5 years ago, and I just texted someone back today that I haven't texted in 2 years because I was just like forgetting. I kept dropping the thread. It kept falling out of the back of my head. 2 years between text messages and someone who I like actually liked and cared about and was wanting to get to know. And so when I think about that, I'm like, wow, okay, that season of motherhood made me drop a bunch of things, including some of the way that I like to show up in relationship. And, it made me shift how I spent my time. Does that mean that for that time that it was wrong? No, like I was really present to my baby and to the things that were happening for me, and I couldn't have shown up any other way. So now that I'm a little bit out of that season, I feel like I can adapt some of those things. But again, if we're looking at 1 month or 1 week or 1 day or one meal, it's really hard to assess for what health is because I think we exist as bodies over time in a way that stretches through the whole lifespan. So I'm not really answering your question except maybe to say like, can we have a wider lens with which to look at this, or can we assess for how much rigidity there is? How flexible am I? Like I think all of those things help us negotiate. And then I think again, I really love to dismantle the idea of the individual mind. Like I don't believe that mind exists within the confines of my embodied boundary. I think mind is actually an interpersonal process and an embodied process,
Wow. Hmm.
which means that when I'm looking at health, I also need to ask like how am I in relationship with the land, with people around me? What are the people in my life also, what are they noticing? How does that interact and intersect with my felt sense about things? Like it's health is very complex, and I think we'd like to make it really nice and tidy and look like a certain diet on the Canada Food Guide or whatever we have, and or daily recommended exercise intake. And I'll say again, by contrast, or just as another like additive example here, I think about trauma survivors that I work with in my clinical practice all the time who run as a way of proving to their younger selves, whether they know it or not, I got away. And so when I
Mm,
think about
wow.
compulsive exercise, I also think about how adaptive that is, that as systems we can be drawn to forms of movement that teach us that the trauma is over. And
Mm.
so would I look at this from the outside and go, whoa, you're running too much, you're out of balance. But then when I add another layer and think, wow, this is a person who's got a trauma history and this is what's regulating for them. Like, okay, makes sense to me. Wow, like that just adds a new dimension to how we assess for strength, even or what wellness looks like.
I love so much of that. I'm getting ready to lead a half marathon training program. And so I'm thinking a lot about how do I lead in this in a way that is holistic, right? So that in yoga, there's this concept of the drishti, where you set your gaze, and it's
Ah,
particularly if you're doing a balance pose, right, like a tree
right.
pose or a dancing pose, dancing Shiva or something, and it's amazing how well it works, that when I'm not focused on any point, I'll just kind of fall out of the pose, but just simply focusing on one point, if it's like a hook on the wall and I put my gaze on it, and suddenly I find this grace and this calm, and I usually surprise myself at, wow, I held that for a long time. And that when we think about training goals or wellness goals of any kind, right? Like I want to drink a green smoothie every month, every day this month, and just see how I feel at the end of that. Or I want to run a half marathon, right? That if we can think about it almost in that same way as, okay, this is my drishti. I've got this goal of this half marathon, and I'm going to set my gaze on it to give me something to look at, to give me something to aim for. But that wider lens, I love the way that you put that, is that like one of the wide lenses that I always try to have when I'm thinking about how I'm eating or um, training for this or that thing is this a goal that's going to translate to longevity, right? Like, is this going to contribute to my ability to be my most vibrant at 70, 80, etc.? Or is it actually going to do damage to my body in the long term because I'm trying, I'm doing something in the short term? And of course, so many diets or even training regimes would actually, I think, fall in that category of this is not a probably sustainably healthy practice. So, but when we can think about it too as that question of, okay, so I've got my drishti, I've got my point of reference, and it is about the journey. Maybe I fall out of the pose. Maybe I get to the starting line of the half marathon or I don't. Maybe, I change my eating habits in this way, but it's about how I'm showing up in this holistic way, and how like having this point of focus allows me to show up in a more holistically healthy way.
Hmm. It brings me back to a definition of healing that I've been wrapping my mind around because I've been working in a project on spiritual trauma. And I know healing is a term that's fraught for so many people who are in
Mm,
faith based contexts or spiritual contexts where healing was promised or seemed to be always appear miraculously or was a sign that you're a good person. And so as I've been really negotiating what healing means, it feels like I keep coming back to it being connection. And when I
mm,
think about healing and health having the same root to them, I often think about health actually as being, relationship, interconnection. Is it bringing me into relationship, you could say, with myself, with my future self, with my
mm,
past self? Is it bringing me into relationship with the land and community around me, with who I, yeah, who I'm kin with? And then I think also asking myself, like, well, how am I in relationship with myself? Like, how, when I have an experience of, distress or pain or challenge, like, how am I meeting that? Am I meeting that with relationship, and what kind of relationship? A good example of that would be, there's a hill by how, near where I used to live that I would run up all the time, especially if I was like, I'm really going to go for it today. Like, I'm going to see what this is like. But I thought of that as, and you alluded to this in reference to my book, but as a way to play with myself a little bit. Like, how am I going to be in relationship with myself? Am I like, what gets me up the hill in a way that doesn't cost me or damage me in some way? Is it that, I can get myself up the hill by like laughing and joking and like, kind of prodding myself playfully? without it, again, harming me in some way? Is it that I get myself up the hill by being compassionate, saying like, you got it, sweetie, you can do it. Like, come on, sweetheart, you're almost there. Go, 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 go. Right. Like, how am I being with myself? And I think that speaks so much to what you're saying about the process as well. Like, can I set my gaze on something, but instead of seeing that as the, again, the sum of the significance of what I'm doing, can I see the way that I am with myself as being the hallmark of health, and the way that I am with myself perhaps being defined by good, right relationship?
So, so rich. Yeah. The way that we are with ourselves and the way that we are in connection as the ultimate goal of whatever wellness, goal that we're tempted toward by the wellness industrial
Right.
complex.
Yeah. Yes,
there's
exactly.
there's one more question I would just love to ask you. If part of what makes your work so powerful is that you've been willing to really dig into your own traumas and mine them for their richness, right? Mine them for their wisdom. And so you've shared recently about some experiences that you've had of whether you would, I'd love even to hear how you would phrase it, like your body disappointing you or failing in some way or something. And I just think about illness, disease, what we have experiences of this on a regular basis, even if it's just like a gastrointestinal distress after eating something, right? But that feeling of so much of your work is about reconciling our relationship with our bodies and learning to treat our bodies as our greatest ally, our lifelong ally, right? And at the same time, the human experience is also so often one of physical pain or physical we break down in different ways, and we break down ultimately, you could say. And so how do we face those times, those moments where the body betrays us? If it's a cancer diagnosis, if it's a miscarriage, if it's all the many ways that we can experience that and rebuild trust or continue to exercise trust in our bodies, in this great ally that we have, and we're all trying to learn to love on amidst so often so much messaging that teaches us not to, right?
Yeah. And I think that that's the point that I want to enter into this with, which is the messaging that teaches us not to, including the messaging about how we talk about our bodies when those things happen, right? Even if we flip the language and say, instead of body betraying us, like it's a thing that happened,
Mm.
right? All of a sudden, the body is not the antagonist to the us that we somehow believe is separate from the body.
Mm.
But like, even, when the body disappoints us, let's play with the language. When something happens that is disappointing, instead of seeing the body as the arbiter of evil, that somehow it is the scapegoat of all of the awful things that happen in the world, I think we need, again, a more complex and wider vision and version of narrative about what the body is, to include the challenges and hardships that happen in life. And so I think that so much of our disembodiment is a result of us not knowing how to be in relationship with the fact that being a body is painful,
Mm.
includes illness, includes suffering, and ultimately includes death. And when we hold a story of body and embodiment that allows for us to see those things as actually part of what being a body means, one, I think we have to get better at facing the terror and the grief of that, right? The reality of what it means that we will die and that we will suffer, and that could happen any moment. But I think it also allows us to flip the narrative. Instead of, the body is on our team until something scary happens, and then all of a sudden the body was bad and did something to us. I just think that there's so much more um, room to generate, or to generate compassion for ourselves and to feel the
Mm.
feelings, when we are not also adding to the story that somehow the reason that things are hard is because our body did something wrong. I think these are all just natural experiences that are part of nature, part of being human. Like, why do forest fires happen? Why is there floods, right? I mean, yes, we can look at climate change and the parallel example as well, of saying like, yeah, perhaps the way that we've built systems and the way that we live our lives increases on some level the chance of us facing hardship and in a bodily way. But it's also very natural and normal for forest fires to happen. They happened for very long periods of time as a way of plant life controlling overgrowth and creating health and creating the opportunity for new things to happen. So we see images in nature all around us of how, the lightning strikes the tree and then actually something quite beautiful emerges in the
Mm.
tree. And there's a story to be told there that I think we can look to again in nature around us and go, oh, whoa, like there is deviation, there is pain, there's life and death, there are circles of, decay and regrowth all around us. And that's actually part of the experience of being nature. And we are nature. We are nature itself. And so I just love for us to move away from narratives that problematize or pathologize the body and to see like, wow, what would happen if instead of saying my body betrayed me, we just said like, wow, this was a really hard thing that happened. And how can I be
Mm.
with that?
That's so good. I think about it echoes the statement that you said. I think it was in The Wisdom of the Body, that the body is not a thing we have, but an experience we are. And that it erases that separation, of like the enemy or the
Mm-hmm.
other in some way or another, right? And I think too, to kind of circle back to what we were saying earlier, it seems like when we take this wider lens of how can I show up to this and allow this to enrich my experience of being human, right? Whether that's a half marathon goal or a cancer diagnosis or intestinal distress, right? Like all the little ways that we experience these discomforts, there is this invitation to become even more intimate with the body, even more curious, and even more deeply human at some level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're so right.
Mm. Well, thank you for giving voice and giving language to so many ineffable feelings that we
Mm,
have, and giving a toolbox for us to get so deep into our hearts.
mm,
And I can't wait to just continue to learn from your work going forward.
mm. Thank you so much. It was a joy to be with you. Thanks for your thoughtful questions and reflections on all of this.
What a conversation. Yes. I want to close this episode with reading to you Hillary's A Letter to My Body from her book, The Wisdom of the Body. I've never come across anything quite like it, and I would love to hear what it stirs in you. Dear body, I'm sorry for telling so many lies about you. I called you ugly, a waste of space, just this and just that. I reduced you and used words with you I would never use with others. I told myself and others stories about you that were not true and did not honor how sacred you are. I'm sorry for all the times I've hurt you, both on the outside and on the inside. I have starved you, scraped you, plucked, pulled, cut, and burned you. I've scrubbed you too hard in the shower. I've filled you with food and then made you empty yourself. I have celebrated when there was less of you and screamed at you when I thought there was even just a quarter inch more of you than there used to be less. You never asked for this. You never deserved this. I'm sorry for the ways I have neglected and ignored you. You told me so many times, this isn't safe, or this feels good, or you screamed, listen to me, but I silenced you. I covered up your voice with distractions and the promise that maybe I would love you, that maybe I would love me if you just stopped telling me things. I'm sorry for how I've kept you stuck and small when you wanted to expand and be free and wild. I sat there trying to be good, but it cost you. I told you we couldn't climb the tree. Instead, we would sit with our legs crossed. I made you think you were better if you behaved and didn't challenge anyone's ideas of what it means to be a woman. I'm sorry for how I believed what other people said about you. They said you were so many things. They called the beautiful, life-giving parts of you bad and horrible names. I let them. I said nothing. Sometimes I laughed. I'm sorry for blaming you for holding all the feelings I didn't know how to feel. You have been so good at telling me when I'm in danger, when I'm alive or full of joy, but the hard things were too scary. Just to get away from feelings, I tried to make you go away, to be invisible, to shut up. I'm sorry for making you an object to use and be used. I'm sorry I felt better for a while when I let people use you. I really thought I would be more lovable, and when you told me you didn't like it, I didn't listen. I'm sorry I didn't know how to protect you from a world that told us both that you were for someone else's pleasure. Not quite enough of this. Too bad, ugly, broken, a thing, a puppet, not wearing enough, the best thing about me, and dangerous. I'm sorry for hating you when you did nothing wrong. I love you for staying with me, for never leaving me, even though I have tried to leave you. You were there, always. And as long as I am here, you will be here. We cannot be apart and never will be. I love you for the ways you let me experience life, through adventure, through taste and smell and sound. Without you, I would not know joy. Without you, I would not even be alive. I used to think my mind was safe and you were unsafe. Now I know my thoughts told me lies, but you never have. I love you because you allow others to love. I love you because you allow me to love others, to hold close my dear ones, to make love, to grasp a hand, to wipe away a tear from another's cheek. It is through you that I show and feel love and know what being connected really means. I love you for helping me move, taking me from here to there, fast and slow, with intention and sometimes without even knowing it. Together we have traveled the world and seen it all. We move differently than anyone else, and it reminds me that we are constantly in a mystical dance, moving through the world like the breath of God. I love you for introducing me to time. No one else will take the journey of life with me, all the ways from beginning to end. As you change, I will remember what we've been through together. When you show lines and marks, it will be the storybook of what I have lived, reminding me daily of all the times I have laughed, chopped apples carelessly, fallen from the swing set, and squinted to see the beautiful day under a bright sky. Skin, you tell me what it means to become wise. And joints, you remind me that we are not permanent, but I refuse to shame you because you cannot do what you used to. I love you for teaching me how to rest. You remind me to care for myself and have deepened my understanding of what it means to be present and still. In teaching me how to rest, you have taught me how to need, and in needing, I have allowed others to love me and give me parts of themselves. Through rest, I understand the rhythms of life. I understand that humility is a spiritual discipline, and I do not have to do it all to be loved. I love you for carrying life inside. You have always had life within you, even before you were born. Each month, I am reminded of this. I plan my week, what I will wear, what activities I do or do not because of this life reminder that you bring to my awareness. Oh, how this reminds me that we are connected to those who come before us and after us. And you remind me always that I am not alone. Even when I am alone, we are together. I love you for being a miracle on the inside. There's so much to you that I will never understand, such as why you and I wrestle sometimes about when to begin the day in the morning or end it at night, when you make a clicking noise sometimes and not other times, why you seem to like it when I feed you some things and not others. You are a mystery to me. And instead of frustration, now I feel full of wonder and appreciation. I love you just as you are. Now, I am sometimes surprised to find myself in this in-between place of not hating anymore, not quite where I used to be, not certain that love is the right word for how I feel about you. While these words are true, some days they feel absolute and other days more tentative, hopeful, and aspirational. But because you have done nothing wrong, I want to keep reminding us both that I am sorry and that I do love you. So again, I cannot strongly enough recommend Hillary's books, The Wisdom of the Body and Practices for Embodied Living. Practices is a book of practices. It's not heady ideas. It's actually practical tools that you can use as simple as your breath and movement practices and all kinds of ways to come home to yourself, your body, your heart. And from my heart to yours, I invite you to my new course, Energize, your 4-week metabolism and mindset reset, a journey to transform your relationship to your body, your energy, and your legacy, building practices of nourishment on a foundation of radical love for your body and clarity on your purpose. 28 days of intentional nourishment with course lifetime access. Energize is a course to heal or reset your relationship to food as energy for your creative work, to sharpen your vision of that work and experiment with new practices and forms of nourishment and fuel your joy. Learn more and join at NicoleMeline.com/energize. Thank you again for tuning into another episode of the Altar Podcast. I am so grateful you are here as we support each other in the practice of growth and living and creating heartwardly in the direction of the heart. Please follow or subscribe and rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I read and so appreciate every single review that you leave. And share the podcast with a friend or on social media. To support this podcast and your fitness and mindfulness journey, join my Altar Together community and digital studio with a free 5-day trial at NicoleMeline.com/altar and subscribe to my newsletter at NicoleMeline.com to learn about new offerings and retreats. Sending you so much love and gratitude for these miraculous bodies in which we live and move and experience the world as we alter together.